I would say, teacher. She takes lectures in ancient Indian history. And more importantly, later, she's also an author. And here, I would not miss the opportunity to show her book of revolutionaries and brave hearts. What impressed me about the book, and my most favorite story is story number two, which is the Sweeper of Bareilly. What impressed me about this book was that I am also an avid reader of history books, but this was a book which didn't talk about events, dates, or wars. That's what students are very allergic to, and they then have a lifelong love or hate towards this subject. But this book talked of people. This book talked of people's emotions, and this is, I would really recommend as a must read. Apart from all the other things, uh, Malika also takes beautiful tree walks, and she has written a book on trees called Tracing Roots. So here is a erudite scholar, an excellent speaker, and I really would not like to come between you and the speaker. So I now hand over the stage to Malika Ravi Kumar.
Thank you, Malia ji, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Neha, for the invitation. I just want to check before I start. Am I audible and visible clearly?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I welcome you all to this evening on the history and the story of tea. It's not going to be only history, but also legends and some interesting snippets. As Malia ji rightly said, tea is a very intrinsic part of our daily life, especially as Indians. We wake up to a cup of tea, we meet people over tea, we take a break from work, it is a chai break. Our Prime Minister is known as the Chai Wala Prime Minister, who has a history of having had a tea stall. So tea is, whether any way you look at it, it's a very intrinsic part of our lives. And today we're going to look at tea, different aspects about tea. As I said, some of it is history, some of it is legend that has been added around the historical records. So what I'm going to do is I have a PPT. I'm going to show it. I'll just check, Neha, that you can see my screen before I start. Yeah, can you see it?
No, it's not visible.
Not yet? Okay. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so the title I've given for the story of tea is Chilling Tale of a Hot Brew. Now, why it is a chilling tale, we will find out gradually. But the story is not all rosy and beautiful. When you go to tea gardens, everything is so peaceful and idyllic and looking so nice. It's in the hills, it is cool, the weather is nice. But the story is not as pleasant as you see when you go to visit a tea garden up in the hills. So before we begin, just to get you all involved and thinking, I have a list of things here, and maybe in the chat box, you can reply by saying whether these statements are true or false according to you, from what you know, and you need not be right. It's just a way of getting you involved and thinking about the subject of tea. So the first statement is tea began a revolution. Do you think it's true or false? Whatever your answer is, you can just put it into the chat box, and then we'll see in the end what actually was the right answer. Wars were fought for tea. What do you think? Is that possible, right or wrong? True or false? You can just answer true or false. Tea was a secret. Could tea have been a secret? I mean, it's something that everybody had drinks. It's a commonly known thing. So could it have been a secret? True or false? Tea was given as dowry. Now, is something like tea capable or worth being given as dowry? What do you think? True or false? Tea created an empire. Tea led to women's liberation. Something as basic and common as tea. I mean, women's liberation is a very big word, very intellectual idea. What could tea have led to that? True or false? Tea led to innovation. Tea has killed thousands of people. Tea has led to several deaths. Is that possible? It's not poison. How is it possible? True or false? At the same time, tea has saved thousands. Now, obviously, one of them is true, one of them is false. Can both of them be true, both of them be false? I don't know. Given your answers, and we'll see as the story progresses. Tea was currency. Tea was a symbol of class. It's like a brand that you use, which is a symbol of your class or status. Can tea have ever been such a symbol? Tea promoted equality. So along with women's liberation, here is another ideal. Tea could it have promoted equality in society? Is it possible? Tea led to longevity. That true or false? Tea led to health problems. Now here again, there are two, it's a dichotomous thing. There are two opposites. Tea has killed thousands, saved thousands. So maybe both are not true. Tea led to longevity and to health problems. So likely both are not true. We don't know. So here, I leave it to you to think about whether these statements are true or false. And as we go along, we'll discover which of these are true or which of these are false. Okay, so going on, when we look at the history of tea, all fingers point to this particular region in China, the Yunnan province in southern China, where is the source of all the tea that we have in the world today, and it is like the mother of all the tea. And why do we say that, and how do we say that? When historians want to understand where something began or where something could have originated from, there are various ways of doing it. One is the etymological way of looking at the word or the idea. Now you look at the word we have in India, which is chai. In Cantonese, it is cha. In Japanese, in Arabic, in Persian, in Russian, in Portuguese. As far as Europe, the word looks like it has a common mother or a common origin. The other word which is used across the world for tea is, of course, the English word tea. In French, it is thé. In Spanish, it is thé. In Dutch, in Danish, in Swedish, all these words have appear that they have another source. But in all languages, these are the two words that are used for describing this particular object or this drink. And how did this come about? When you look at the etymological root of the word in both cases, both of them point to China. The first one is tea, which is the Chinese character for tea. I don't know to read Chinese, but this is a character. And this is a calligraphic representation of the word tea. Now, in Mandarin, which is one of the largest spoken languages in China, the word is pronounced as chai. But in another dialect, which is spoken along the coastal areas of China, it is pronounced as te. So cha and te both come from China. And that is one of the clues that we have to understand that tea could have come from China. Then you have various legends that come from China. This is an interesting legend, and some of you may have heard of it, that there was this Chinese emperor called Shen Nung, and he is believed to have lived around 2700 BC. That is, a long time ago. And he was sitting under a bush one day, a slightly taller bush, which they used to call tree then, and he was boiling water under it, and some of the wind blew the leaves into the hot water, and he happened to drink it, and the flavor that he had, he really loved it, and that is how tea was discovered. This is a legend of Shen Nung, and which is around 2700 BC. We don't know how far these things could be true, but this is a legend that is held out in China. Another legend is that it was actually a Buddhist monk who wanted to meditate and stay up all night, and he was drinking warm cups of water to stay up and keep himself awake. But as he was meditating, similarly the wind swept some leaves into his cup, and that helped him stay awake because there was some property in those leaves that could help him stay awake and meditate. And then it became very popular amongst the Buddhists as a tool to meditation. This again is a legend. There is no historical record of these things, but these are legends. Another legend is about this particular tree in the Bashan province in China. It is said that the tree plant, which is now a shrub, was originally a tree. It was not a shrub, but because it is constantly being pruned and cut in order to yield tea, it doesn't grow beyond the height of a shrub. But that originally it was in fact a much taller plant, and it could grow to become a tree. And it is said that there are certain tree plants still in China that grow much taller than a shrub. So this is a legend of an ancient tree, which was the origin of all the tea that we have. What is interesting is some of you have asked questions about, how we Indians drink tea with garlic and herbs and pepper and elaichi and all these things. So what is interesting is that it's not an Indian quirky way of drinking tea. This is how tea actually began. Tea was not drunk as a beverage, but it was actually had as medicine. And tea was, in fact, like I have said here, mixed not just with ginger as we do, but also with garlic and onion and some other herbs and spices. Thankfully, we have gotten rid of the garlic and the onion, but tea was, in fact, a medicine and not had as a beverage earlier. But over a period of time, it went out of the realm of medicine and was consumed as a beverage. And the person who is behind that is this person called Lu Yu. He is regarded in China as the tea sage, and he lived around in the 8th century AD, that is the current era, and he is called the tea sage because he wrote a treatise on tea, which is called the Book of Tea, the Classic of Tea. And I'm just going to read a little bit from his book to give you a sense or a glimpse. When the water is boiling, it must look like fish's eyes and give off but a hint of a sound. When at the edges, it chatters like a bubbling spring and looks like pearls strung together, it has reached the second stage. When it leaps like majestic breakers and resounds like a swelling wave, it is at its peak. Any more and the water will be boiled out and should not be used. Now you can see from this glimpse just about how water should be boiled. I mean, that was the kind of attention this book of his paid to how tea has to be made. The book has about 10 chapters about how to grow tea, how to cut it, how to process it, how to make it, how to serve it. And it's an encyclopedia of tea. And, it is said that this book was actually written by him at the behest of tea merchants. Now, we all know, the modern way of creating demand, for example, for toothpaste and shampoo and conditioners and things for which there was no demand 100 years ago. But advertising and the corporate world create an artificial demand in order to sell their products. Now, if the Americans do it today, the Chinese did it long back. The Lu Yu wrote this treatise, they say, at the behest of tea merchants in order to create a demand for tea and in order to increase tea sales. So here you have a great book where you have plenty of information about how tea should be grown. Now, tea was not drunk at that time the way we drink it today. As I said earlier, during the time of the emperor and the Buddhists, the legend, they were just leaves that were put into hot water and boiled, and the water was hot, and that was how it was drunk. But later on in China, tea was actually had in this form. It was dried and then compressed and put into molds, like you have a cake mold. It was put into a mold which was made into a brick or a cake. And then you could then use this as currency. This was easy to carry around with you, and it had a lot of value because everybody would use it as medicine or as a beverage. And unlike paper money, which had no value, this was also therefore easy to transport because it wasn't very heavy. And the picked leaves would first be steamed, then dried and ground, and then compressed in these molds, and then used whenever you wanted by putting it into hot water. It also had binding agents. Sometimes the binding agents was flour, sometimes it was animal manure to bind these leaves together. So this was how tea was earlier had. This was during the Tang dynasty in China. The second way in which tea was had, once time moved on, and this was during the Song dynasty, where tea was actually whisked together. It was powdered and whisked together with this bamboo whisk. This was also a time when of great prosperity in China, and things starts getting a more aesthetic, sense around it. It is not just a medicinal or a hot brew that is had or used as money, but in time of prosperity and things start becoming more complicated. And then you have this, which is the way we see the Chinese drink tea, or the way we have green tea today, is brewing the tea. It is not boiling the tea, but brewing the tea, where you have boiled water, which is used already boiled water, and tea leaves brewed in the tea. It is not to be boiled. So these are the three processes in which tea evolved. To, of course, in India, we don't. Most people boil tea. Some of them brew tea. And we have the tea bags, which was also a much later addition after the World War. But this was how Chinese people had their tea earlier. But gradually, tea grows into something bigger, and that was the reason behind it. Is these three ideas that happened in China. One is Taoism. Taoism is around 6th century BC, the same time as Buddha. Confucius also around the same time. These were great. This was a period when there were great leaders, thought leaders in many parts of the world. Zoroaster was there in Persia, Buddha and Mahavir in India. You had Tao and Confucius in China. It was a period of great enlightenment across Asia. And Tao is a way of life where people related to natural things and nature around them, and there was beauty in simple things. And one of the things that Taoism propagated was having tea, of contemplating and looking at life through simple things. And one of the simplest pleasurable things in life was enjoying your cup of tea with your friend, your family, by yourself, with your book. But tea became a very important part of aesthetics and their way of life. It was not just medicine. It was not just a brew or a beverage. It was much more than that. Buddhism also contributed to tea because meditation and contemplation, staying up for long hours, something that Buddhist monks would do, and tea actually helped them stay awake for longer because of the caffeine in it. It helped them in their meditation. And this word teaism is actually a word that exists in the English dictionary, where you look at the whole idea and the philosophy around around having tea. So this actually began in China as something which is more than just a beverage. So as you see, from a medicine, it became a beverage, and then slowly to a way of life. Now, when you look at way of life, tea becoming a way of life, nothing beats what happened to tea in Japan. Of course, even today, the Japanese tea ceremony is something that, tourists go to see, and it is a way of life for them. Tea in Japan is a very, very detailed ceremony and a process. We've all heard of the geishas who serve tea in tea houses. There is the idea of how a tea house has to be made, what kind of furniture should be there, what kind of plants should be outside, the mats, the decor, the utensils in which the tea has to be made. There is great, great detail and attention paid to all of these things. And the Japanese tea house is called the Chashitsu. And here again, tea acquires a grand value. It's not just a beverage, but something about culture. And again, here, like in China, you had a tea sage. So you have in Japan as well. This is Sen no Rikyu. He is the Japanese tea master who took tea to a completely different level in Japan. Now, he lived around in the 16th century. He was a Zen master. As you had Taoism in China, you had Zen Buddhism in Japan. And tea became a very central part of Zen Buddhism in Japan. And he wrote this treatise where he talks about how you must build a tea house. The ceiling should be low, the floor should be made of bamboo, how the hearth should be made, how you have to have certain kinds of painting or decor inside. And one of the central themes was there should be no repetition. So if you have a rectangle object in the room, you cannot have a painting in the room. You should not have any other rectangular object. If your tea utensils were oval, then something should be round. So it had very many ideas, and there is great detail and thought gone into what he wrote down. He also wrote down a lot about tea. One of the interesting stories that is told about him, and I like the story very much, is that in order to explain what a tea garden or a tea house must look like, Rikyu asked his son to clean the garden. So it is said that his son actually swept and he cleaned the garden, and then Rikyu says, no, this is not clean enough. And then his son went back and he swept and he cleaned, and again Rikyu says, no, it's not clean enough. And his son says, you know what? I have cleaned it twice over, and the steps are clean. I have washed it with water. I have swept all leaves and everything off the path. And there is really nothing for me to clean. And Rikyu says, you know, what a fool you are. This is not called clean. And then he goes to one of the trees in the garden and he shakes it. And when he shakes it, the leaves and the flowers fall down on the garden path. And he says, this is how a garden should look. So the idea of cleanliness in a tea garden is not that everything is spick and span, just like the idea of Zen or Taoism. It is that it should be nature's way. It should be how things ought to be in nature. And from this, you get a very useful idea from the story, is that clean is a relative term. What is clean to you may not be clean to me, and so on. So this is a very nice story which is told about a Japanese tea garden. Now, the story of happiness and joy and tea being a very aesthetic, pleasurable experience, unfortunately, sort of comes to an end here in our journey, because story of tea takes a very dramatic turn now with the entry of the Europeans. As I said, Senrikyu was in the 15th, 16th century, and that is when the Europeans entered Asia. And from here, these are the two sailors or explorers, as we call them, whose explorations and whose voyages changed the history of the world. There is Christopher Columbus on your left and Vasco da Gama on the right. Both of these, their voyages in search of Indian pepper, they came to Asia. Also, they went on to China. The Portuguese first went to China, and then the others followed, the Dutch, and then the English. So their entry into Asia actually changed the story very, very much. Now, when they came into Asia, they obviously took various Asian products back to Europe with them. And one of the things they took back with them from China was tea, because China had, tea was such a big part of their economy. Curiously, now in the coronavirus times, every day you have a report saying, do this, and you should have haldi, you should have kada, you should have this, and you should not do this, and this will help you. This is not something new, and human beings have been doing that for a long, long time. So when into Europe, it was a curiosity item. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody had it before. So here you have various people who commented on it. For example, the German physician to the king of Denmark said, tea hastens the death of those who drink it. It's a very venom sort of thing. You should not drink it at all. Of course, he had no idea what he's talking about. People didn't know what it was, and everybody had an opinion and wanted to say something. Then here you have another person, a Dutch doctor, who says, no, tea is a very good thing, and those who use it are exempt from all maladies, that it is the best thing for you to drink. This doctor, next person, goes one step further, and he urges people to drink it every hour. And he says, begin with 10 cups a day, and it is safe to drink up to 200 cups every day. So here you had, people just shooting off their hips, whatever they wanted. Now with 300 years later, we all know that we can sit back and laugh, but at that time people didn't know what this drink was, and they took what doctor said very seriously, as we did about the coronavirus last. Anything your doctor said, you thought that was it. And then an English ad for tea in the 60s, it said, tea prepared with milk is excellent for the bowels. So you had people saying all kinds of things, some good, some bad, and everybody was confused. Nobody knew really whether tea was good or bad. But and tea was it was being imported as one of many items from China. You had silk, you had porcelain, you had many things. So it wasn't something special. What made tea very special in Europe was the drinking of tea by this Princess Catherine of Braganza. She was the Princess of Portugal, and she married the British Prince Charles II. Now we have heard in India, especially in Bombay, about this marriage between them, because we know that the island of Bombay, what was called Bombay, Mumbai today, was given as dowry in the marriage between Charles and Catherine. The Portuguese who had Bombay at that time gave these islands as part of the dowry when Catherine married Charles. What we don't often hear is that Bombay was only part of the dowry. Along with Bombay, there were certain other parts of the Portuguese dominions that were handed over to the English. A lot of gold was given and a chest of tea. And the reason tea was given was Catherine was one of the few Europeans at that time who had taken a liking to tea, and she loved her tea and she wanted to take tea with her to England, and as part of her dowry, her parents gave her a chest of tea. Now, this marriage happened in 1662, and that is when tea actually starts becoming popular in England. Of course, like I said earlier, the Dutch were getting tea into Europe, the Portuguese were getting tea into Europe, but there were many opinions about it, and nobody was really, and coffee had already arrived before tea into Europe, and coffee was gaining more popularity at that time because tea was very expensive. Tea was coming all the way from China by ship, took around 9 to 12 months, and the price of tea was exorbitant. So it wasn't very popular then. Once Catherine started drinking it, and then she took it with her to England. Tea mania sort of thing grips Britain. I mean, they go absolutely crazy behind tea. Catherine starts drinking tea, gives call people in the palace, calls aristocrats for tea parties in the afternoon. Now there is an interesting story that there is again no historical record for this, but it is a story which is a legend. Catherine doubted that Charles was having affairs with other women, and to keep them away from her husband, she would actually call them for a tea party or to the palace, that they would be in her company, would not be wandering with her husband. So she started throwing these tea parties, and that could have been the origin of kitty parties, where you have women gathering in the afternoon to have tea. And again, Catherine could be the reason, and she could be the person who started. Is a possibility. Now, when she started giving tea parties and had the aristocrat in England started having tea, slowly common women in the sense, wealthier women started having tea. And the reason for this was that coffee houses at that time were prohibited for women. Women were not allowed entry into coffee houses. It was a men-only sort of place. And because they could not get entry into a coffee house, tea houses started opening to have this opportunity of having women there, and then made tea their drink. If men were having coffee and having these intellectual business discussions in coffee houses, women started having kitty parties and tea as a way of showing that we too can have a party. So tea parties and kitty parties and tea houses became a very women-centric affair, and sort of one of the statements I said was that tea contributed to women's liberation and equality. So here you have women asserting themselves by using tea as a tool to say that, if you have coffee, we can have our tea and have our to ourselves. And as the years progress, tea becomes more and more popular in Britain, and you see that working class people, women and men, start having tea. Tea becomes a preferred beverage, and working in the Industrial Revolution that took place in England, said, and it is not just a statement like legend, but there are people who have studied it, say that one of the reasons the Industrial Revolution found, of course, there are other factors that, in England that were conducive. For example, it had a lot of coal, the Protestant work ethic. You had the English, who were fairly liberal, unlike the Portuguese and some of the Europeans who were very devout, and their main agenda was to spread Christianity and churches and so on. But the English were not like that. There was a scientific work ethic there. There was a different way of looking at it. So all those factors were also there, which worked in England's favor. But one of the many things that went in England's favor was that tea became extremely popular. And how is that? So tea, earlier people drink beer as a drink that was preferred by ordinary people, and of course water. But when people started drinking tea, what happened is they had to boil the water by default. And when they started boiling water, a lot of germs were killed, and that helped to improve that there are studies that show that infant mortality rates fell because of tea in England during the Industrial Revolution period, and that longevity, life expectancy increased at this time because people were falling sick less. There are many records that also suggest that ailments like dysentery and other waterborne diseases drastically fell in the 18th to 19th century, when England was going crazy about tea. And there is a strong correlation between tea and the improvement of health in England. Now, many of these industries actually, because they were they had machines. Workers could not be drinking beer and be inebriated. They obviously had to be alert, and tea also contributed to that. So the industrialists and the people who had factories, they even gave workers tea allowances. They gave them tea breaks. That was part of their, the way of getting employers, getting labor, because tea became so popular that people would want to go to a place where they gave a tea allowance or gave a tea break. So in many ways, tea had a very strong connection with the Industrial Revolution and workers. It became the workers' drink in England. This was also a time when tea became tea time, because of this Catherine of Braganza incident and the women having tea. There was a separate meal like tea time, and then dinner, which was earlier in the day. They had dinner and then supper, which was the way the English ate at the time. tea time becomes a separate meal, which was around 4 o'clock, and therefore dinner got shifted to later. And they say that people's eating habits changed because of the introduction of tea in their meal. Then Britain's thirst for tea. This is just to give you a glimpse of what happened. The first chest of tea came from China in 1660s, around 1660s, and one and a half in the course of 1.5 centuries, you see going from nothing to 36 million pounds of tea coming into Britain. So this is a lot of tea that was coming in, and there was something called tea races and tea clippers, because the first ship that brought tea from China, that would get the highest price, because the demand, people were waiting for when the harvest happened in China and the tea would come into Britain. It would still be several months. So there would be races between ships, and tea clippers were specially designed ships that were made, which were very, where the hull was very narrow, and the design was such that the would clip along the waters, unlike the earlier, large ships which would take very long. So clippers were invented to cut through the sea and get faster back to England, so that particular shipment of tea would get the highest price in England. So it was a very important part there, became a part of English culture as well. Of course, the global impact of tea. This is the route tea would take. It would go around India, around Africa, around the Horn, and then go into the hump of Africa, and then go to England. And then from England, because the English settlers were going to America at that time, tea was already popular there, because the New England and other places were where the English people were going to settle the American colonies. Now, this is another story which American kids are, grow up learning. The Boston Tea Party. This was an event that spurred a revolution in America. American independence actually, traces its origin to the Boston Tea Party and what happened, which was all related to tea, where there were the tea tax. The English and the French had been fighting a 7-year war around their colonies in Canada and America, and the English won that war. But despite winning, they were in a economically very bad state, and they needed to increase taxation to fill their coffers. One of the many taxes that the English imposed in America on the colonies was the tea tax. Now, the Americans did not like the tea tax. They did not want this tax to be imposed. They filed several petitions with the king. They did not get a response. And finally, there was a particular ship that was harbored at Boston, and the Americans said, we will not allow the tea to be, the ship go back to England. We will not allow the tea to be unloaded, and we will not pay the tax. There was a dispute, and all the chests of tea within 1 hour were tipped over into the harbor there, and a lot of was destroyed. Now, this Boston Tea Party, the idea of the Boston Tea Party and what happened there is become part of American legend. You have stories such as, the picture you see on your right, that there were people who dressed as Red Indians in mohawk hats and went to, destroy all this tea. There are paintings, there are, plaques and commemorative monuments in America today. This is a stamp issued by the government of the government of the United States about the Boston Tea Party. So it's a very central part of their story of independence. Now, when all this tea was destroyed, the East India Company, which was very influential at that time, they managed to get an ordinance from the king that the Americans must compensate for all the tea that is destroyed, and until there is compensation paid to them, the Boston Harbor was closed and nobody could use the Boston Harbor. Now, they thought that this was one of the many coercive acts that Britain imposed on America because of what happened at Boston. They thought that the Americans would therefore bend and adhere to whatever they want, but this completely went against their expectations, and this actually spurred the American war of independence, which led to the independence of America and America breaking away from Britain. So all this happened with some tea. So it was at the bottom of that as well. Now, what happened and one of the things that I happened to read is that, America is today known as a coffee drinking nation, not so much a tea drinking nation. And this is seen as one of the reasons where earlier a lot of Americans were drinking tea 2-3 centuries ago. When the tea taxes were imposed, people consciously changed their habits in order to show Britain that they did not want tea, they will not drink tea, and tea became a rally point for showing their defiance against the royal house in Britain. So the Americans now drink coffee, but they used to drink tea at one point, and became one of the symbols of protest in that sense. Now, what happens with all this tea that Britain is drinking. Britain wanted tea from China. Britain wanted silks from China. They wanted porcelain from China. China at that time was the wealthiest nation in the world. It was all ancient culture. On the other hand, China did not want anything that Britain was selling. They had this coarse cloth called Worcester cloth, which the Chinese didn't want. They had these different kinds of Dorchester cups and plates, which were made in England, which again the Chinese didn't want. They said, we have our fine porcelain, thank you, we don't want this. The only thing that China had was some demand from what Britain made was clocks and clock toys, which the Chinese were not making. But the Chinese had everything. They were a self-sufficient culture and they did not want anything else that Britain made. And how many clocks can one buy? So whereas tea was something that they would need regularly, porcelain breaks and you want to keep buying it. Silk is something you want to keep using, giving as gifts, clothes. But clocks, of course, you can't consume in plenty. So there was a trade imbalance. And Britain tried to sell many things and the Chinese said, I'm sorry, we don't want this. You take our tea, we're very happy to sell you tea, but you pay us in silver. Now the silver that was being paid largely minted in Mexico and the new world, as it was called, the colonies of the European nations in America. And Britain's silver was getting drained because, like I showed you, the Industrial Revolution happened. It became a workers' drink. It was a elite drink at one point, but it slowly became very popular. And Britain was drinking copious amounts of tea. And and a lot of silver was getting drained. So they came up with a very unique solution because China did not share the secret of tea with them. Tea was like a national secret in China. Foreigners were not allowed to the mainland of China. They were only allowed in certain ports. And even in those ports, they could only, there were restricted activities that they could do, and otherwise foreigners were not allowed inside. So the English wanted to know where tea was grown and how it was grown, but nobody knew how this, the tea packed in the box, which they were ultimately getting, how was it grown? What was the plant like? And how did you process it? Nobody knew that. It was a secret. And the British did think of a solution which was out of the box. This is a caricature you find on the web, which is not a very pleasant one, but that is what literally the English did. They thought of a very out of the box solution in order to get tea, and their solution was in opium. Opium at that time, as it is today, is is a drug, and it is banned. It is restricted. In India at that time, the Mughals, who controlled large areas of India, were in control of the opium trade. And opium, as Afim is the local name, was used as a painkiller. So if you had an injury, or you had a warrior who went out to war, and the physician and he lost a limb or something, opium was used in order to operate on that person or kill the pain. Opium had its use, very restricted, and it was controlled by the government. And when the British came to India, the East India Company took control of many of these lands which were earlier controlled by the Mughals. They also inherited this control of the opium trade. The opium was reasonably popular in China. People used to have it as a drug. There used to be opiums, and the British, smelt an opportunity here that we want to the balance of trade situation, and here we have control of the opium in India, and there we have potentially some demand for opium. Let's use the situation to our advantage, such that the silver flows to us and the tea also comes to us. So it was a very out of the box solution, very, very cruel, but this actually happened. You had and then India found itself at the crossroads of this Anglo-China relationship. So opium, like I said, poppy grows in certain parts of India. It was controlled by the government, and the government forced the East India Company forced a lot of farmers in India to grow poppy, to give up their food crops and start growing cash crops. One of them was poppy, and process this opium in government factories, and they of course controlled them. But the British did not import opium India to China. That was done by the Indian merchants. Many of them were Parsis, and many of the wealthy Parsi businessmen today, they do have a history of being opium dealers at some point. They were taking the opium from India, from Calcutta, from Bombay. The rise of Bombay also has this murky past of being based on a lot of opium that was shipped from the port in Bombay to China. It was taken to Canton, to Hangzhou, to other ports in China. China, of course, banned opium. There was a ban on opium. But the Chinese custom officials were hand in glove with many of these merchants who then pushed opium into China. They were bribed. There was a lot of corruption in their system. And opium slowly trickled into China in small numbers and grew into a huge business in China. Here you have seen pictures of some opium dens. In 1839, 40,000 chests of opium. And in 1872, that increased to more than double, 93,000 chests. And China was consuming 95% of the world's opium. It was being pushed, again, an artificial demand being created, and huge amounts of opium become available. And all this was for tea. It was because the British wanted to drink tea and not pay for it. You see, again, another statistic that shows how opium imports into China increased at a galloping rate in the course of 1.5 centuries, and it was something that crippled China, which was an empire. The British Empire is what we call empire, but China had a huge presence. It was an ancient culture. It was a refined culture, and China was brought to its knees because a lot of people were absolutely addicted to opium. Its soldiers were addicted. Its customs officials were addicted. Its government officials were addicted, and it was impossible to fight this disgraceful this episode. And one of the attempts that China made was appointing this honest officer called Lin Zhezu. And he tried to crush this opium problem. And I'm going to read just one part of his letter to show you the approach they had. He says that he writes to Queen Victoria at that time, and he says the products that originate from China are all useful items. I don't know if you can say about China today, but are all useful items. They are good for food and other purposes and are easy to sell. Has produced one item that is harmful to foreign countries? I have heard that you are a kind, compassionate monarch. I am sure that you will not do to others what you yourself do not desire. So here you see, a very refined way of thinking, speaking with respect, even though they are, being crushed at, in this opium trade that is going on. You have some who's speaking with respect to a monarch and saying, please don't do this. This is not a useful thing, and you should not be sending opium to India, to China. But Britain does not react. There is no response to this letter. And what in fact happens, and then Lin Zhezu goes and destroys, just like the Boston Tea Party happened and tea was destroyed. He then takes a lot of opium and burns it. And then in retaliation to that, when he burns this opium, Britain, the East India Company is up in arms. They are very influential because many of the East India Company officials have bought their way into the British Parliament. They are very close to British monarchs, and they have a lot of influence in determining policy in England. And then make this rallying point, the destruction of opium. And they say, you know what, maybe opium is banned in China, but they do not have the right to destroy opium. And this is an affront on free trade. I mean, people should have the opportunity to trade anywhere they want. And this is not allowed, even though China has banned it. They are arguing for taking action against the Chinese for destroying their opium. And this fueled what is called the Opium Wars in China. The first one in 1839. This was fought. The central point was because the opium was destroyed, but Britain wanted control over China. They wanted the tea, of course, and China lost this war, obviously, because Britain had superior weapons. They had better ships. Just 2 British ships destroyed about 30 or 40 Chinese ships. The Chinese medieval weapons, same story that you have, how Britain took over India. India had medieval weapons. They had medieval war strategies at that time. There was internal fighting and bickering. There was corruption. Same story that happened here as well. And the British win this war, the first Opium War. China has to pay reparation for all the opium that is destroyed. China has to pay them a lot of silver. China has to concede a lot of territory in terms of allowing Britain rights to trade in more ports than were earlier allowed. And we all may have heard, the city of Hong Kong, which was British for many years, was given by China to Britain in this as settlement of this war. That's when Hong Kong goes and changes hands from China to England for 100 years. And then about a few years ago, it was returned. And then still continues to have simmering conflict there because of all these changes that happened. Then there was another war fought because the British were not happy with what they got in the first war. And another war was fought and settled by the Treaty of Nanking. And the Chinese called this the century of humiliation because they were an ancient power. They were wealthy, they were prosperous, and they were brought to their knees because of these events, and they therefore call this a century of humiliation. The general I told you about, Lin Zhezu, he was actually sentenced to death by the Chinese emperor because he failed to do what he had to do. A sentence of death was then commuted to life, and he was imprisoned, etc. But today's modern China, he is considered as a great hero because he stood up to British imperialism. So this is the story of how opium was fueled by the British desire for tea. And at the same time, the British were not going to sit down and say, we'll fight these wars and get our tea. We all know how industrious they were and how they went out of their way to get what they wanted. So you had Lord William Bentinck, who was the Governor General of India at this time. And William Bentinck is known in all study in school that he's the one who banned sati, and he took some other measures, including Lord Macaulay, who introduced English as the medium of instruction in India. But one of the many things that William Bentinck also did was have a tea committee, and he was interested to look for alternative sources of tea, because the British soon realized that China is not going to be a reliable source, and we need an alternative source of tea. So he set up a tea committee, and there was somebody called Thorn, who was sent to Assam and certain other regions to look for tea in the Himalayan mountains. And there was a report sent back with some shrub and some saplings. And one of the things that was written in the report to William Bentinck is the tea shrub, beyond all doubt, indigenous in Upper Assam. It was a grand discovery. The British were very, very thrilled with it. And this is what the report says: we have no hesitation in declaring this discovery to be the most important and valuable that has ever been made on matters related to agricultural and commercial resources of the empire. So that is how important tea was to Britain. And we see why that was so important. It was not just a plant. And another big attempt that they made, theft tea. The British sent a botanist called Robert Fortune. By British, I mean the East India Company. They sent a botanist called Robert Fortune. He disguised himself. As I said, Chinese did not allow foreigners inside China. They were only allowed in certain ports. He disguised himself and he took a Chinese name. He, started wearing his baggy trousers. He shaved his hair and had this little tuft of hair behind him, as the Chinese have. He started talking Chinese. He learned Chinese, Mandarin, and he disguised himself, bribed certain people to help him, went into the interiors of China. He did 3 trips to China. He was sent to the East India Company, and he robbed. And I use this word very consciously because it is unfortunate when we talk about the Western powers, words like robbed are not used, but they would use more gentle words. He robbed and stole 20,000 tea plants out of China. And these were cases that were designed, again, as we said, Britain had a lead in scientific inventions and innovations. They had come up with this sort of case called a Wardian case, where during these long journeys, plants get destroyed, and you didn't have enough water on the ship to water plants, because whatever water was there needed for the sailors and the people working on the ship, and you didn't have much water for plants. So they developed this particular case, which was a greenhouse case, where the water coming out of the plants, the transpiration, that water actually goes back into the soil and waters the plant, because the cases are closed. This was an invention, again, made in order to steal plants from various parts of the world. The British had, the botanic gardens you have in China, you have in many parts. They are not for pleasure, like a pleasure paradise for Indians to roam around in gardens. They were actually, laboratories for experiments on plants that the British wanted to get from various parts and seas. For example, they got quinine from South America because a lot of their officers were suffering from malaria, and they got tea from here. They had rubber. They were experimenting with various plants, and Robert Fortune sent his tea plants to India in many of the ships. He made 3 trips, like I said, stealing many plants from China and disguising himself, and the Chinese had no idea. And slowly, with what William Bentinck's committee found and with Robert Fortune gets, China becomes, India eclipses China in the tea trade. As you see in this graph, slowly India, the share of Indian tea going into England is far more than the share of Chinese tea going to England, and also they take it to Ceylon. Now, Ceylon and South India have blight, coffee blight, had coffee plantations at that time, but because of a blight, a lot of coffee plants got destroyed. And in order to make up, the British planters started planting tea, and they took a lot of Tamilians from South India into Sri Lanka to work on their tea plantations. So a large part of the Tamil population you have in China originally went as tea workers. And you have more tea. The British have a lot of tea to drink. You have ads which come out in newspapers, as you can see here. Twinings in London has a coffee house, but they open a tea house right next to the coffee house so that women can come there and be part of the tea culture. And tea becomes extremely popular, available. And slowly, the strategy that Britain wants begins to work. What they do is that they reverse the balance of trade that is was working against them negatively. Now Britain is sending manufactured goods to India because they have crippled the Indian textile industry, which was doing very well. The manufactured goods are being sent to India. Opium is being sent from India to China, and the silver and the tea are both flowing from China to Britain, and India is all sending tea to Britain. So this is how Britain benefited in this dangerous game that they the strategy worked for them, because India and China, in terms of weapons, in terms of unity, and several other issues, could not match up to Britain. And Britain, of course, tea becomes part of their culture. Here you see the Alice in Wonderland illustration of Mad Hatter's Tea Party, whether it's their literature, whether it's their way of life, whether it is their daily schedule. Tea becomes very, very intrinsic part of British life, as it was in Japan and China 2-3 centuries before. And India joins the tea party as well. Britain finds that, what better than such a large demand for this tea, and they start selling tea to Indians. Indians were not drinking tea before that, and even as late as the last century, you'd find some, I have read statements by Mahatma Gandhi where he says you should not drinking tea. Tea has tannin, tea has caffeine. It's not good for health. So there was. It wasn't clear that everybody was drinking tea. Tea was not popular at all. But here again, a demand was created. You have an old ad where people are shown how to make tea, because nobody knows what to do with that tea which you get in the box. What do you do? How do you boil the water? Then how long do you brew it? What do you add to it? All this was, had to be shown to people. So the ads actually had, some steps on how to use it. Here you have another old ad, "Be nashe ki pyali hai, dil khush karne wali hai," where you're trying to sell this beverage, saying that nasha nahi hoga, it is good for you, and the woman is shown as a central part of this ad, because it is to her that the tea makers are appealing and saying this is not going to create any nasha in your husband or the man of the house, and this is something you should buy and give him. That was the thrust of the advertising. And then you also had this Swami tea service, which was in Madras at that time, Chennai now, where you had a great amount of artistic, aesthetic beauty in tea sets that were made, not just the porcelain you had in China, but even India. And these tea sets became extremely popular in England. And the Swami tea service, you can see, had these, images of Indian gods and their vahanas. So it really became, and today tea is a completely ubiquitous part of our life. So slowly Indians also started taking to tea. I should wind up in just a few slides. So tea has also a negative footprint, in the sense here you have currency. Tea gardens in India, where were set up only because tea became popular, started having their own currency. So people could, use that currency in the while buying things from the tea garden shop and so on. And it created a community of people who were based in the tea gardens, as we know, tea is picked by women. Even today, the picking is done by women. The women are not paid as much as the men, but the picking is all done by women, because tea has to be picked. The leaves have to be picked in a certain way with gentle hands, and just the two top leaves with the bud. So it is still manually done, and it is done only by women. So labor, it's a very labor-intensive industry. But the labor in tea gardens has had a lot of problems over the years. This is a separate topic, so I just want to hint at it without going into it. But tea laborers, and especially the women working there, have had many issues working with tea gardens. And deforestation is a major issue related to tea gardens, not just in India but outside as well, because all the land you see that was earlier carved out by the British planters to plant tea is actually forest land. And forest land has been cleared extensively to make way for plantations. So, in fact, I know an environmental activist who does not drink tea because it is a statement of protest that, because tea is coming from killing forests. So that is another big footprint that leaves, is the destruction of forests. Those who want to read more about it, here are some books I would recommend. This is the first book I read some years ago. It's a beautifully written book about Darjeeling and the Darjeeling Gardens and the history of tea. The Hungry Empire talks about not just tea, but other food items and products that Britain were central to the British conquering the world and becoming an empire. A History of the World in Six Glasses, another very interesting book. Tea is one of the six glasses. There is also coffee, and there is beer, and there is Coca-Cola and others. But talking about history through six glasses, another nice perspective of looking at tea. And Maliaji showed my book of Revolutionaries and Bravehearts, just a glimpse of that. One chapter deals with the story of opium and tea and how India was caught at the crossroads, where there are opium farmers in India who don't want to plant a poppy, but they are forced to do that. They're forced to give up their food crops. And actually, there can be, or I haven't gone into it in detail, but there are references to the Great Famine of Bengal that happened and other famines that happened in the British era. And one of the causes was that a lot of people had been forced to stop planting food crops and start planting cash crops. So, and tea was one of the cash crops. Opium is one of the many cash crops. So, could be a correlation between the famine and this policy British as well. These are some illustrations from the story where you had, Robert Fortune taking on a disguise and going and getting all these plants of 20,000 plants from China. This is one of the stories in my book. So just coming back to why did the Industrial Revolution take place in England? How did the British East India Company become so wealthy? Very, very central questions of history that one studies about. How did an island, small little island like Britain, become a global power? There was a point in time where the tax from tea was actually one of the biggest contributors of the tax that was collected by the Royal Treasury, because tea was such an important item that was being traded. Was also, one of the 60% of the East India Company's trade at some point was tea. So tea was very, very central to Britain's power. How did Bombay become a financial hub? Like I said, opium happened because of tea. What caused mighty Chinese empire to collapse? What triggered the independence movement in America? These are very big historical questions, and one would seldom think that something humble, a cup of tea, was behind these big, big historical events. But that is the truth. So coming back to all these questions that I asked at the beginning, each one of them is true. All of them are true. Tea start a revolution. Tea was a symbol of class, because earlier it had aristocratic families had tea, and it was seen as something that was a very classy thing to do. Tea was a secret. Wars were fought for tea. Tea was currency. All of these things are true. And to end on a lighter note, because we've had a very gruesome journey of tea, use these expressions in English: not my cup of tea, storm in a teacup, tempest in a teapot, not for all tea in China. Reading the tea leaves, Cassiopeia, again something related to tea. There's no time to touch on it, but reading tea leaves became like, reading your palm or reading your future, where after you drink the tea, the tea takes in the protein. There'd be tea readers who would read your future with the tea leaves. So that reading tea leaves became, a form of reading your future. Tea party, having a tea party used as an expression. Spilling the tea, like spilling the beans, is also, letting out a secret. So all these come from this one plant called the Camellia sinensis. This one plant contributed so much to history, so much to language, so much to our culture, so much to our daily living. We all think of history as being moved by kings and generals and wars and big events. But I like to look at history of plants and see how plants change the world. And it is true that little humble plant did all this, was behind all this. Maybe not actively, of course, there was human agents involved, but it was all being done for this plant and what comes out of it. And just to end on, again, like I said, a lighter note, some proverbs about tea which warm the heart. Better to be deprived of food for 3 days than tea for one is an ancient Chinese proverb. This is an ancient Chinese proverb again, an ancient version of an apple a day keeps a doctor away. Drinking daily cup of tea will surely starve apothecary. Like an apple a day keeps a doctor away. If you are cold, tea will warm you. If you are too heated, it will cool you. If you are depressed, it will cheer you. If you are excited, it will calm you. I love this quote because I love tea. I feel a little guilty sometimes. I think of this history and the deforestation and all that, but limited to 2 cups a day. But nevertheless, it's those 2 cups that I feel all this, that it warms you when you drink it and read a book, sit down with friends, have chai. It's a nice part of everyone. Tea is the elixir of life. Like I said, the Taoist movement, tea was very central to it. Confucius also, tea was very central to it. Tea tempers the spirits and harmonizes the mind, dispels lassitude, relieves fatigue, awakens thought, prevents drowsiness. Very lofty words, but all related to the love of tea. And there are hours in life more agreeable than the hour dedicated to the ceremony known as the afternoon tea. And all of us here are tea lovers, and I'm sure we would agree with much of what is said. So that brings me, I think 1 hour. I hope I've not exceeded the time. There is much more to be said, but I have tried to keep it short, to pack it within 15 minutes. And I hope you have all learned something about tea and, look at history differently, not just a story of kings and wars, but look at plants differently and look at how plants have impact history. Thank you so much. Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Malia ji. And we can now open up to questions.
I thank you much, Malika. It was marvelous. Like, requesting you to compact into 45 minutes, I think that was unfair. And yes, you have a very lucid way of narrating this historical perspective, where it is including every arena of life, every arena of those eras. So thank you very much. We now move towards the question and session. The first question is by Mr. Murray Chen from DCW Limited. He asked, why in India do we have tea with milk, whereas in China it is herbal tea?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and there was one of the many things I wanted to address, but there was, like I said, too much. So having tea with milk is not an Indian, addition or an Indian concoction. So when the British started taking to tea, and tea went to Europe, like I said, coffee became very popular in many parts, but there was a brief period in France where tea was more popular. And the French actually started adding milk to tea and sugar to tea because milk, when they boiled the water, temperature was very hot, and to sip such a hot drink was not easy. It would burn your tongue. To bring the temperature down of the drink, they started adding milk, which was not hot, not boiling. One of the reasons for flavor, because milk also added flavor, and I'll get into why that was so. One was bringing the temperature down, and the other was very hot drinks in the porcelain cup could crack the porcelain. In order to bring the temperature down to save and preserve their porcelain, which was also very expensive, they would add milk to bring the temperature down. That is how the practice of adding milk began. It was not something Indians started. It was being done by the French, and even at that time, whatever the French did, would catch on as the fashionable thing to do. So the French were the ones who started it, and somehow, strangely, tea then became less popular than coffee. But there was a period when they were doing that, and it continued. And why were they adding milk for flavor? So there are two reasons. One is the Chinese were having green tea, and they still continue to have green tea today. But the green tea, which was being transported to Europe, it was more perishable than the black tea. Green tea would spoil because there would be 9 months of a journey on a ship, in the holds of a ship, which was moist, and it could get dirty, and green tea would get spoiled over time. Black tea was not as perishable as green tea. So black tea became more popular than green tea. The second reason black tea became more popular was that at this time, because the demand was soaring, there were a lot of smuggling of happening, and the smugglers used to adulterate the tea. Adulteration is not a modern phenomenon. It has been happening for a long time. They used to adulterate the tea with various kinds of things, including dung of animals, some mud. There would be ash. There would be all kinds of things. And it was more difficult to adulterate tea because it was green and leaves, whereas the black tea was brown and it was powdery. It was easier to adulterate black tea. So for all these reasons, black tea became more popular because it was less perishable and easy to adulterate. And because black tea became more popular, they started drinking it. But black tea is also bitter. It's not easy to drink black tea just without milk like green tea is. Green tea one can drink, it's not bitter. Because black tea was more bitter, that was also another reason why the French and the others started adding milk to it. So one is to bring the temperature down. Two is to add flavor because black tea was very bitter. And the reasons were that it is more perishable and it was easier to adulterate. Black tea became more popular. So that is the story of why milk was added to tea.
The second question is from Neelkant Mehta. The question is, green tea is promoted as a health drink. Is it so?
Yeah, so I am not a doctor, but I have read many accounts of green tea being healthy. Good for diabetes, good for weight loss, good for cholesterol, good for many things, for calming down. And as I said earlier, tea was a medicine. Tea was being used as medicine earlier in China, and then it became this popular beverage. So there must be some truth to tea being, good for health. But I don't vouch for it medically because I don't have any medical understanding of what tea does.
Next question is by our mentor, Mr. Subhasha Malya. In today's world, there are many tea like cinnamon, flower, etc. Does a botanist really consider them as tea? Do you think these are teas? Do you think that Adrak Wali chai has more benefits than green tea, except for the sugar content?
Yeah, so actually, when the British and these Robert Fortune and the others went to China, they were very confused. They were looking for black tea and green tea and different types of tea. But all the types of tea that you get, black tea, oolong tea, white tea, green tea, all of them come from the same bush. Camellia sinensis, that is the tea bush, is the same source. It is only that it is processed differently. So some of them are dried for a longer time. Some of them are crushed for a long time. The processing of all these teas is different. So it is not fermentation changes in case of oolong tea and white tea and so on. So it is the same bush and the same tea. It is just the processing which is different. Of course, adding adrak and adding these other things are things that we do with tea, adding lemongrass, adding elaichi and so on. This is mainly done in India because we are like the spice nation. Just like chai changed the history of China, spices changed the history of India. So spices are something which is central to the Indian way of making tea. But generally, the 4 types of tea are all from the same bush and the same tea.
There's a question from Dr. Nandan Shastri, who wants to know more about the Kashmiri Kawa tea.
I don't know about. I've tasted the Kashmiri Kawa. In Kashmir, they also add salt to the tea and butter to the tea. I think the tea tastes very different from what we have in the rest of India. But adding salt, I think, is also a remnant of the earlier way of how tea was had in the mountainous regions, where they added salt and onions and garlic and ginger, which was, like I said, a medicinal brew and not a sweet beverage that we have today. But other than that, I don't know much about the Kashmiri Kawa and how it's different from the tea that we have. Except taste, they add salt into the tea. I think they have pink tea also, pink tea in Kashmir. Yeah.
Okay. There is a lady, Kamalika Ghosh, who wants to add something. Would you appreciate if she does so?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Ms. Kamalika, please unmute yourself.
Madam, I want to add 2 points over your discussion. One is that first you have told that French people added cold milk with the tea to make it the pot temperature of the pot goes down. And it doesn't crack. Actually, when you add cold milk, the color of the tea is something bad. I would say that not something faded color, even that goes down. For that, we Indian, what we do, we initially preheat the porcelain teapot with hot water, so that it doesn't crack. And not only that, we add warm milk with the tea, so that flavor and the color of the tea comes very nicely. And second point is that why this green tea and the raw tea is good for health, even for meditation. What you have explained for this Buddhist monks and others. Actually, it is the herbs and it is an antioxidant. That's why this antioxidant keeps our brain cool. That's why it is helpful for meditation. When you add up sugar in it, it becomes toxic. That's why some people says that it is poison, and some people says that it's a medicine. It's a lot.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for adding. Yes, a lot of people do say that adding sugar, you're just tasting the sugar, you're not tasting the tea if you add the sugar. So, yes, adding sugar again started, the English did it because they had these plantations, sugar plantations in the Caribbean and the West Indies, and they got sugar from there and tea from the East, and they made it, an English drink. But yes, adding sugar is considered that's why one of the things I had said in the beginning was tea is harmful for health, but so sugar is the reason that that makes tea harmful in that sense. But otherwise, yes, there are many good properties to tea that are considered good for health. Thank you for that addition about the porcelain also, how it was heated separately. I did not know that. That's interesting to learn.
Thank you, Ms. Kamalika. Thank you, Ms. Malika Ravikumar. I now request our mentor, Mr. Subhash Rao Malya, to deliver the closing address and conclude the session.
Yeah, thank you, Malika. It was a beautiful session. In fact, the next time that I'll have tea, and many of us will be reminded of your stories. And all these stories, if adding sugar and tea leaves, sugar itself has been the sweet food that has brought misery to a whole, I think, generations and generations of people, from slavery to so many things. So, of course, the next cup of tea would be had with of respect. And going to the taste part of it, I think it will be there for a few more years. Dani Cafe Chai with that Brun Muska. And originally they used to put that Polson Muska. And that Polson Muska had a little bit of salt, if you remember. And the way you have tea was by dipping the Brun Muska, which was a coarse bread with the layer of Polson butter with it, Polson Muska. I think calling Polson Muska butter or any other name would, sort of lose the flavor. And you dip it in the chai and drink it. And as your chai, the liquid goes lower and lower, the content of this melted butter would go on increasing. So, the beauty was, if you are very, very sensitive, every sip of tea would give you a different flavor. And fortunately, there are still some Irani restaurants around. Also, Polson is replaced by Amul butter. Still, a little bit of that flavor lingers. So, I think we had a very, very good session. Like Arthur Brooke, who was the owner of Brooke Bond, and he said Brooke Bond. He used the word bond because, as you said, tea was adulterated. He claimed that his tea was unadulterated, and he had built a bond of trust between himself and his customers. That's why the name Brooke Bond remained. I hope that after your talk, there is a different bond with you, with your books and tea, especially
Thank you so much.
tea. And what you say is saluting that bond. I want to thank you for coming and delivering the lecture. I thank Neha and Mirasi and her team. She's got a small team for organizing these lectures, doing a lot of things on social media to get the message across, the admin behind this. I thank, of course, all the viewers to come and listen to this lecture on a Sunday evening. Today there are so many distractions. Sunday evening, the whole week being busy, Sunday is the only time when you get to be with the family. Again, to join an online session. Thank you very much. We had a great time, and yes, tomorrow we'll all be at least mentally connected when we have our morning cup of tea. Thank you, and with that I
Thank you
sign
very
off.
much. Thank you so much.